next up, we're going to have Dr. Michael J. Strambler. All right, and so I'm going to run through some of his profession a little bit. Michael Strambler is a 96 graduate of Morehouse College. He's a postdoctoral associate at Yale University School in Medicine and a Ford Foundation Postdoctoral Fellow. He's a graduate of Morehouse College and holds a doctorate in clinical and community psychology from the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Strambler's research interests concern understanding and addressing achievement disparities, especially among ethnic minority, poor, and at-risk youth. So I'll ask him to come up now, and we'll prepare his slides for him. So, Dr. Strambler, thank you. Let's see. Let's make sure we can do this thing right.
And can we lower the lights a little bit? I have slides here that might be a little difficult to see.
Make sure this thing comes up.
First, I want to thank Dr. Rice for that introduction and thank him for the invitation for a couple of reasons. For one reason, it's we're now getting a bunch of snow up there in Connecticut, so it threw me a little bit of a lifeline here to be able to get away from all that. But the main reason, though, I want to thank him for the invitation is because it's been so long since I've been back to Morehouse College. As he mentioned, I graduated in '96. I was a little hesitant to say that, but since we have another elder on our panel, 96 doesn't seem to be that long ago. Probably the last shot you're going to get during the presentation, hopefully. But Morehouse has always had a special place in my heart, and this is, since it's been such a long time since I've been here, this is a bit of a homecoming for me. This was me back in '96 when I got my degree. But I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here to talk about the psychological disengagement from school among blacks. And in a minute, I'll be talking about exactly what I mean by psychological disengagement. Generally, what I'll be talking about is this notion that blacks devalue academic learning or don't invest in academic learning and how this might contribute to the achievement gap. There's been a variety of different theories and notions with regard to this, and I'll be running through just giving a quick little snapshot of some of the thinking and theories on this, a little snapshot of the evidence, and then some thinking on where that leads us and where we should be headed in terms of work on this topic. So before getting into the meat of the talk of what psychological disengagement is, I want to set up the conversation by just giving a little bit of data on the achievement gap. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the fact that blacks underperform whites on just about every measure of academic achievement that we have. This is the most recent report from the Department of Education Institute for Educational Sciences on the achievement gap. As you can see from this table here in mathematics, there's about a 31-point gap between blacks and whites. The gap has narrowed a little bit, as you see back in the 1996 and 2000. The gap was a little bit larger than it was in 2003, and actually now it's the smallest it's been in quite a while. But as blacks have been improving, so have whites, so this gap is still relatively significant. Compare males to females. On average, black females are overperforming black males. As So you see the gap is about 34 for males and 29 for females in math. We'll find similar trends in reading. So there's about a 26-point gap between blacks and whites on average. And comparing males and females, there's not as much of a difference there as there was for math. So it's just to give you a sense of where we're at in terms of the achievement gap. But I want to go beyond this and talk a bit about this theory that and thinking that African Americans are disengaged from academic learning, and that it somehow contributes to the gap we see in this data. So when I talk about psychological disengagement, that was the title of my talk. What do I mean by that? Well, in the literature on academic engagement, academic engagement is many times conceptualized as having three main components to it: behavioral engagement, psychological engagement, and cognitive engagement. Behavioral engagement is what most people think of when they think of academic engagement. It has to do with participating in school, following the rules of classrooms and schools, and being involved in important learning tasks. Cognitive engagement is a higher level form of academic engagement that has to do with one being more intrinsically invested in learning. So those who are cognitively engaged have a preference for learning and like to learn outside of the classroom. Psychological engagement, what I'll be focusing on today, has to do with valuing academic learning and considering it a part of your identity or identification. So with respect to blacks, for example, there's this notion that blacks are disengaged or don't value academic learning. And this notion has come from, it's been spoken to from many different disciplines. A number of different scholars have noted this. Scholars who are conservative to scholars who are liberal. And I just want to run through some of these popular ideas. One of the more conservative scholars, Shelby Steele, noted in his book, The Content of Our Character, one of his more famous books. He speaks to this notion of integration shock. Essentially, what he's speaking to here is that what he believes is that blacks have a deep-seated sense of anxiety with regard to feeling inferior in some way to whites. And this has been a byproduct of slavery and oppression that came after slavery. This is what he says in his book, The Content of Our Character. When blacks move into integrated situations or face challenges that are new for blacks, the myth of inferiority is always present as a condition of the situation. And as such, it always threatens to breach our denial of racial vulnerability. It also threatens to make us realize consciously what is intolerable to us, that we have some anxiety about inferiority. And so he goes on to say that because of this anxiety that blacks possess, there's a tendency to retreat from domains such as academics that are uncomfortable for us. Another popular scholar that many of you are probably familiar with is John McWhorter. Many have called him conservative. I actually don't know that that's a fair label to place on him. He's actually a bit all over the map in terms of political ideas. But one of his more famous books and one of his more controversial books was Losing the Race. I think it was published in 2000 or so. And in that book, he talks about this idea of anti-intellectualism among blacks. He describes it as a cult or a virus that infects the African American community in such a way that it results in disengagement and academic underperformance. And this is what John McWhorter says. This is an excerpt from his book. The main reason black students lag behind all others, starting in kindergarten and continuing through postgraduate school, is that a wariness of books and learning for learning's sake as white has become ingrained in black American culture. Segregation and disenfranchisement, withholding learning from most blacks, had long created a sense of alienation from learning. So he goes on to talk about how blacks have come to identify learning as a white thing and being less engaged with school as more of a black thing. So sort of that it's almost a white prerogative to be engaged in school. And there's a black prerogative to be engaged in other sorts of things that don't involve academics. So we don't only hear it from, we don't only hear this claim from conservatives and maybe moderates like John McWhorter. We've heard similar statements uttered from, from Barack Obama back in 2004, the Democratic National Convention keynote address. This is what he said: go into any inner city school, any inner city neighborhood, and folks will tell you that government alone can't teach kids to learn. They know that parents have to parent, that children can't achieve unless we raise their expectations and turn off the television set and eradicate the slander that says a black youth with a book is acting white. So this idea is a very popular one when you see it making its way into such speeches. And at this time, he was a senator, but now president of the United States. What a lot of these people I mentioned were speaking to when they were talking about this idea of acting white when blacks are engaged in school, what a lot of them were speaking to was actually data that originated from John Agbu and, no, I don't want to restart now. What they were speaking to was actually research done much earlier by an anthropologist, John Agbu, and colleague Signethia Fordham. This is Signethia Fordham's book on the right side there, blacked out, and this is their seminal paper, Black Students' School Success, Coping with the Burden of Acting White. This is ethnographic data from a high school that they called Capitol High. It was a pseudonym, but an actual high school in the Washington, D.C. area, where they found evidence to this effect that black students were teasing other higher performing black students as acting white. And there was a dividend, a cost they had to pay in popularity because they were engaging in school and doing well in school. So he also talks about involuntary minorities, which African Americans are, that they sometimes develop identities in opposition to the values of the dominant culture, especially when they have had a history of being denied from such values, education being one of them. So he said that this is largely a result of African American history and the oppression that they've experienced throughout that history. So far, what I've covered some of the more popular notions of this general concept of psychological disengagement. There's also been more social scientific approaches to understanding this. Ironically, one of the folks doing related kind of work is Claude Steele, who is Shelby Steele's brother. He takes a bit of a different perspective from Shelby Steele in his own work. While he also believes that anxiety can lead to disengagement, he believes that this is mostly in reaction to the fear of confirming negative stereotypes, or what he refers to as stereotype threat. So in the case of blacks, this has to do with the fear of confirming a negative stereotype about blacks being less intelligent than whites. And he theorizes that over time, the more blacks are exposed to these kinds of stereotype threats, the more likely they are to disidentify from academic learning. And he talks about disidentification. He talks about this in the sense of removing one's self-esteem from the domain of academic learning so that it doesn't really matter how well or poorly you perform academically. It doesn't really affect your, how you feel about yourself. So he had this theory of academic disidentification. And while he hasn't directly done a whole lot of work in investigating this, other social scientists have. For example, Majors et al. in 1998 conducted a study, an experiment with college-age students where they examined students' self-esteem in response to feedback about a bogus intelligence test. So they found that when feedback for whites was positive, that whites' self-esteem generally increased. When feedback on this fake test was negative, their self-esteem also tended to decrease accordingly. For blacks, on the other hand, what they found was that whether the feedback was positive or negative, blacks maintain their same level of self-esteem. And this is in line with other research as well about self-esteem of blacks, that actually blacks on average have higher self-esteem than whites, and that's regardless of how well blacks perform in school. At the high school level, Osborne conducted a study where he looked at academic disidentification across 9th through 12th grades. And the way he examined this was by looking at the correlation, again, between self-esteem and academic achievement, trying to get at this concept of disidentification that Claude Steele noted. And what he found was that this effect was mostly for African-American boys. So out of all the groups and subgroups that he looked at, he really only found this kind of disidentification for black males, where there was this low correlation between how well they were performing and self-esteem. So this is just a snapshot of some of the social scientific research. There's also economists have jumped in the mix in terms of trying to understand this concept. One of the economists, Roland Fryer at Harvard, has examined this notion that blacks pay a price for doing well in school. Particularly, they pay a price in popularity from other black peers. And he looked at the data on grade point average in a nationally representative sample. So looking at grade point average in relation to a popularity index that was determined by peer nomination. So students were asked who they thought were popular and who wasn't popular, and he constructed a popularity index based on this. And as you can see, that kind of orange line there, the one that's more linear, represents whites. So as grade point average increases, popularity index increases pretty much in tandem with that for whites. For blacks, on the other hand, you see as grade point average increases, popularity also increases until about GPA of 3.3, 3.5 or so. And then the popularity actually drops off. So blacks who are performing better at that level actually tend to have lower popularity. Another way of looking at that is saying blacks with a 4.0 have about a same popularity of blacks of about a GPA of 2.9. For Hispanics, you see the drop off happen a lot earlier. So those who have about a 2.0, I think there's about a 2.5, 2.2 or so. Then after that, there's this significant steep drop in popularity. With regard to boys, black boys, Fryer also found that this drop-off happened actually earlier for boys than it happened for girls among blacks and Hispanics. Another important thing to note here is that, as Dr. Rice mentioned as part of his talk, was context matters. So the effect was only found in public schools, and the effect was only found in integrated schools, ironically. So in segregated schools where they were primarily black, you don't find this price that students are paying in popularity. So all of this, might lead you to wonder if acting white is being identified as doing well in school. How are blacks, and particularly black males, identifying what acting black is about? Or if they're disengaging from school, what are they engaging in? And there's been some interesting theory on this as well, although much less work has been done on it. There's this idea of cool pose or alternative investment. That's the term that I just kind of made up, and but is, I think, fitting for understanding what black youth might be engaged in as they become disengaged from academic learning. Majors and Bilson published this book, I think, in the early 90s, based on interviews they did with inner-city black men. And here's how they described what cool pose is. It's the essence of cool is to appear in control, whether through a fearless style of walking, an aloof facial expression, the clothes you wear, a haircut, your gestures, or the way you talk. The cool pose shows the dominant culture that you are strong and proud despite your status in American society. So within those words, you see a response to oppression in such a way that one is able to maintain their self-esteem, as we found in some of the other studies, through adopting and investing in a subculture that has to do with style and control and in some ways being almost emotionless and tough. There's been much less research in terms of understanding how youth perceive what acting black actually is. But there's been a little bit of research, I believe, in the field of sociology. This is a recent study by Peterson, Lewis, and Bratton, where they asked students, how they perceived acting. What did they think acting black actually was? And these are from the mouths of the students that were interviewed. And you see some of the most dispositional definitions they came up with are acting tough, acting lax, having a don't care attitude, and acting disrespectful. So talk about misplaced black authenticity, what Dr. Rice mentioned earlier on. They're appear to be identifying with very stereotypical notions of what it means to be black. And this is what is, in their minds, defining black authenticity. So I've talked about some very discouraging data. I don't want to be all doom and gloom here. One thing that we can say in terms of the good news is that although we find some evidence of these of psychological disengagement among African Americans, it doesn't seem to be as widespread as some maybe have indicated or originally have thought. There seems to be more of an effect among males, and I think the jury is still out with regard to how much of an effect it has on the achievement gap. The other good news is that there's been some important work done with regard to what does promote academic engagement and academic achievement. Just want to run through quickly. I know I'm coming up on my time here. Some of the thinking on the factors that promote academic engagement among not just African American students, but among all students. So one of the things we know is that children and youth exist within multiple contexts. They exist within families, they exist within classrooms, they exist within schools, and those schools exist within communities and a multitude of other different contexts. And each one of those contexts has its own unique culture to it. And I think there's been some really important good work in thinking about the factors associated with those cultures that contribute to the underperformance and disengagement of blacks and what might promote engagement and achievement. One of those contexts, obviously, is the role of the family and a culture that exists within the family. Something that goes unspoken of, I think, far too often is that the achievement gap is evident before school entry. I think a lot of people don't know that. And it's a rather, I think it's a shocking statistic, a shocking fact, that even before kids enter school, or right when kids enter school, that black students are underperforming whites. Now, what does that mean? Well, unless you're ready to accept that blacks are genetically, intellectually inferior to whites, that might lead you to, it would lead you to believe, unless you're ready to accept that, it will lead you to believe that maybe there's something going on in families that might be contributing to underperformance for some, and for others who are able to perform at a higher level. And one of the things that we know is that there are some key factors related to student achievement that exist within the family, one of which is parental expectations about learning, parental styles, how authoritative or authoritarian parents are with their children, how much monitoring they engage in, and then educational socialization. There was a recent meta-analysis done looking at the various ways in which parents prepare their children for school and how that's related to achievement. And educational socialization was one of the more important factors related to achievement. So what is this? And it's actually very much related to this idea of supplementary education, an idea put forth by Edmund Gordon, one of Dr. Rice's former mentors. This has to do with how much parents take their children to museums and engage in educational activities outside of school. Very important factors. And the schools that are able to, schools that tote a high performance among low income and African American students are able to engage parents in these ways. So what we can do is to continue to promote participation and communication with schools among parents and ensure learning continues beyond the classroom within families. There's also a culture that exists within classrooms. We know that there are status hierarchies within classrooms, for example. When I say status hierarchies, I mean within the eyes of teachers and within the eyes of other students. There's notions of some students having greater academic ability than others. To the extent that we can equalize academic status within classrooms, the more likely we're able to promote engagement among all students. There's been a couple of different approaches in the literature that have been proven to be effective in equalizing engagement and status. Cooperative learning is one of them. Essentially, cooperative learning is group work that promotes interdependence, so that Each individual student's success is dependent upon the success of other students. And complex instruction is a variation of cooperative learning where status of the student is emphasized. So the teacher makes an explicit effort to target low-status students in an effort to equalize academic status in the classroom. There's also whole school approaches to understanding how to promote academic engagement. And there's been a number of whole school approaches that have been very effective. For example, Success for All, which uses a cooperative learning approach. Some of you may have heard of the Harlem Children's Zone that have been very effective in improving achievement among low-income students. KIPP schools seem to be showing up promising effects. And one of the key factors that makes such schools effective is this focus on creating a culture of learning. So every school has a way of transmitting, whether it's deliberate or not, a sense of academic and social values. The schools that are able to, that have the highest performing students place a lot of effort on creating a social environment that youth feel a part of and feel at home at. So, there's another interesting area of research called 90-90 schools. These are schools that are 90% ethnic minority, 90% in poverty, and 90% performing above standards. And I think this is another promising area with research with regard to understanding what works in promoting achievement among some of the most at-risk youth. And I think these schools, I think, provide some of the greatest hope for reducing the achievement gap and ensuring that all students can perform highly. Because these schools do exist. These schools exist. And again, they're among the most high-risk youth we know. Some of the elements that the research has found have been effective as some of the elements of these 90-90 schools, rather, are a focus on academic achievement. Again, the culture, nurturing a culture that promotes achievement within the school. So among these schools, you see works from the students in the hallway. They have contests that focus on achievement. Everyone knows where the school is at with regard to their progress and benchmarks. There's this laser focus on achievement. Other things, and I won't spend as much time on these, is a clear curriculum choices, frequent assessment of student progress and multiple opportunities for improvement, an emphasis on nonfiction writing and collaborative scoring of student work. So there's an emphasis on data and understanding where students are at all points to make sure that they don't fall between the cracks. Some very hopeful research here. And lastly, I want to speak to the role of the scholar. Just like there's a culture within classrooms and schools, there's a culture within academia. And when I'm talking about scholars, I'm talking about people like myself, people like the other folks on the panel, people like other folks in the audience who might be interested in understanding and studying these kinds of issues. And within this culture, we talk about academic disengagement of blacks in one of two ways. In one camp, folks tend to emphasize the individual behaviors of the youth and how it can contribute to self-destructive behaviors. So that's one camp. And then in the other camp, we have folks who tend to emphasize the social, historical, and psychological contributions to disengagement. In the first camp, the first camp tends to be accused by the other camp of blaming the victim, and ignoring the pressures placed on black males. For example, folks like John McWhorter have been heavily criticized for blaming the victim. And the other camp is sometimes blamed for simply engaging in political correctness while ignoring the inconvenient realities of how culture can have negative effects. And I think this game we play of this blame game we play is a highly counterproductive one. We talk about these things as if they're mutually exclusive concepts and ideas, and when in reality they're not. One can be complicit in their own underperformance, academic performance in this case, while also being affected by the multitude of social forces that might contribute to their underperformance. So it's my hope that work in this area will continue to create a more nuanced perspective that takes the best from both of these kinds of views on academic underperformance and address an issue that is truly complex. And it's also my hope that this will also be a charge for Morehouse men to engage in complicating these concepts. And as Dr. Franklin talked about, upsetting the curriculum, the equilibrium, rather. not upsetting the curriculum. We don't want to do that. We want to upset the equilibrium. And I want to thank you for your time. I look forward to discussion further about these things. Thank you.